Lauren, do you want to get started with introductions?
Yes. Welcome, everyone. And like Lisa just mentioned, my name is Lauren. I am the River Run Network Program Manager here at Watershed Management Group. And so I will be helping to moderate tonight's event. We have Lisa Shipek with us, who is our Executive Director. We've also got two incredible guest speakers. Josefina Cardenas is here with us tonight, as well as David Tenario. So we're very excited to have both of them, all three of them here with us today to talk about our heritage of flowing creeks and rivers. And like Lisa said earlier, you are welcome to throw any questions that you have for any of our speakers in the chat. We'll have time for questions after each of their presentations. So you are welcome to, during their presentation, put them in the chat, and then we'll have time to answer them at the end. And with that, I think we can get started. What do you think, Lisa?
Yeah, I think I had a first slide before maybe Josefina starts. That's still in there. Yes. Okay. So to get started, I just wanted to share our land and water acknowledgement. And this has been something we've been talking about and thinking about as an organization over the last year. So I wanted to share that with all of you. So Watershed Management Group acknowledges that we live, learn, work, and engage with the community on the ancestral lands of the Hohokam, Sapapari, and Apache people, and those of the Pascua Yaqui and Tohono O'odham people, whose relationship with the land continues to this day. We acknowledge that water in the Sonoran Desert is of great spiritual, physical, and ecological significance to be protected, cherished, and celebrated. And this acknowledgement helps guide us as we think about our work in this area and really acknowledging those who have come before us and very different ways of being in the land, stewarding the land, acknowledging and relating to the land, and just that really sacred value of the land and water and the watersheds we work in. So again, it's a great honor to have our guest speakers here today to help represent those diverse perspectives. Thank you, Lauren.
And I believe first we have Josefina talking about her perspective.
Buenas tardes. I was just sharing the great title that we have, Our River Heritage, the story of Tucson's rivers and our future legacy. And thank you for giving me this honor of being able to share. Ms. Liz, thank you for the invitation. And I'm from Barrio Kroeger Lane. The Santa Cruz River is in the lands of Tucson. And our family is with the 4th generation, but within our barrio, there's up to the 7th generation in the same home or in the same area below Sentinel Peak. First of all, I always want to give my gratitude and acknowledge the first people of these lands, because from them is how we have learned the sacredness, like Ms. Lisa just shared, and giving us the opportunity of forming part of being part of Mother Earth, the river, the waters, how well we know that water is life. So we thank the Tohono O'odham and all nations of these lands. Believe it or not, I was having some difficulties and I was a little late in turning in my presentation. But then I was very thankful, just with the title, as I mentioned, the Santa Cruz River as our heritage legacy. And I thought, my gosh, are we rich? Our culture, our history, traditions, the faith, the storytelling of our elders, the legends. And we have also made it as a profession, our vocation, that includes the rivers, the creeks, and it's our ways of life now. There's a story of one of our elders that she shares of the Santa Cruz River, of being her place where she went to take a bath, did her laundry, and also a hunting with her brothers, and the mountain to go as entertainment. And Juanita's stories is always enjoyable. And praise Creator, we still have that opportunity of hearing her. This past June, we were able to participate in a global water ceremony. It's named Global Water Celebration, but with us, it's ceremony. And we dedicate it to our Santa Cruz River. And numerous of us, diverse, came together. We thank Chairman Nunez that came down from San Xavier to start us up with a prayer and blessing. And I'm sure all of us there had great words of how we were all united with the intention of safe waters. And glory be, look at the great rings we had this season. And then we also had traditional food of the autumn. Brandon was over with his family and cooked fresh fry bread for us. We heard our children with their poetry, because our children have been mentored by the university and the Poetry Center. So it's amazing the words that have come into their mind, as well as their thoughts of our river. And then, of course, we made it our ceremony with the drum. And as Ms. Liz was sharing, the spiritual significance of these waters of our Santa Cruz River, as well as our washes, our creeks. And the Santa Cruz River has a very significance because of many, of allowing us to have those waters to harvest our crops and our sustainability within the years. And we know the history that Padre Quino used it as a route from Sonora all across the states with the lead of the Santa Cruz River. And then our beautiful ceremonies like Dia de San Juan that we celebrate yearly, and it's been from generation to generation. I give credit to this digital art of Señora Linda Victoria. And then, although we see it as art, as poetry, but a very significant, because it's the storytelling that we share with our children, and they include it with their stories. Abelardo Mezquita is one of our Barrio children, and also being mentored by the University Poetry Center, and we take part in the Pima County Living River Awards. And at 7, it was so amazing to see him that his hand became a tree. And then you can see the shadow of the mountain. You can see the full moon. So his poem reads, "A full moon night, 4 coyotes with the Llorona in the river below the mountain near the tree." So everything is there in his drawing. And the Llorona is a story, a legend that we always share from generation to generation. And it's so amazing that in different countries, it's a different story, but it's still the Llorona. And the Llorona is known to be in the river. And sadly that she cries for her children, but it's also a way to discipline our children. No? Be careful, or the Llorona. No? But it's a legend we always like to share, our story. Next. I am going to be focusing strongly in our children because of their talent, of their poetry. And Anissa Catalan was chosen one of the winners this year. Last year was Abelardo as the grand prize winner. This year was Anissa. and it connects with how the river is. And her poem says, I see water, the blue shining reflection of the sun. I see the nature, the living life, as if it was a village with happy people. I see the rock with their own design. It's almost like you can see the years put in, almost like a story. I see cowboys with horses walking on the south, shining yellow like sand. And that village remind me so much of our barrio because of being here from so many generations. And Anissa on one side of the family is the fifth, and the other side is the sixth, because her family members have been here for those many years of blessing. Next slide. And the Santa Cruz River, known as also as the Santa Maria, because doing our research, how sacredness that they named it after our sacred mother, that connects the rancherias along the path to include economic development through horse membership, agriculture, farm areas, and lifelong communities. Because it's so interesting how the ranches along the rivers know each other. And this must be the heritage that Juan Bautista also shared with us in the Anza Trail. And these two poems were not chosen as winners, but to us, they're winners and always will be. And that's why we're out working in our barrio to have a gallery and a historical house we have. We're gonna restore it so we can save all we have, because Barrio Kroeger Lane has also been researching us, making it the statement that we can be seen as a historical area. And these poems are very significant. Imagine the continuation of our future heritage because of what they are thinking as now. And Sofia Landeros is 9, and she says, when I go to see the river, and she just has to walk a distance, I feel the warm sand falling through my hands. I feel at home. It feels like the warm, welcoming, like a sunshine ray of love, and welcoming the green, beautiful plants reminds me that there is life and a beautiful feeling. It's like a pot full of flowers. I always pick them to remind me of the Santa Cruz River. And then Maritza, she's 13. So she's using the medicine that we use, because the curacao, the gobernadora, we use it in our medicine as some different remedies. And she says, I see the water stream getting smaller. I can feel the cold rushing water. I can hear the ducks quacking. I can smell the extraordinary curacao. I love that the river is a place I can go to help me cope. So imagine what the river, the waters, the area is for a 13-year-old to go and cope. So I'm glad that we're there, the river is there, and that she always feels that there's a place to cope, as we all do, no? Because we can walk those creeks, walk those washes, walk those rivers, and recuperate of all we've been going through without these years. So I thank you for this opportunity of sharing. And I'm sure all of us are here for a reason, and we want to keep with this sacredness of the inheritance we have and share that legacy for it to continue. And appreciate that water is life, and it's for us and for our generations to continue. Gracias. Ometeo.
Thank you, Josefina.
Thank you.
If you have any questions for Josefina, you are welcome to put them in the chat. Thank you so much. Again, I really enjoyed listening to all of those poems. We did have a question that was slightly unrelated that maybe Lisa can answer. Iris would like to know if there are any other groups in the US that share similar values and provide similar training like Watershed Management Group does.
Yes, that's a good question. That's a hard question. There definitely are some other organizations that I can think of and other places. Iris, whereabouts are you? Where are you looking for specifically? Yes, I think there are. And what I think also looking beyond maybe traditional, what might be called environmental organizations or water conservation organizations. I think there are a lot of social organizations that are also working in caring for the earth. So I think there are quite a few local organizations in every community where I think maybe it's just they may not have the reach, but absolutely, if folks have organizations in mind that you think you've seen that have great programs to offer in other parts of Arizona or the Southwest or the US, feel free to put it in the chat. But one I'll just bring up is Tree People, which is an organization based in LA that I follow, and I think they do some awesome work in the community there. But if anyone else has organizations that they love in other parts of the country, put them in the chat. Would love to see that. All right, am I next or is David ready to go?
I don't see David in here anymore, so he must be still having trouble with his printer, which I can totally understand. Printers can be very difficult at times. So let me reshare my screen, Lisa, and I think we can get started with you. If I can find, there it is.
All right, thank you, Lauren. All right, so you can go on to the next slide. So I have some historical photos from the same vantage point. These are courtesy of USGS. Some of you might have seen these before, but I really like to share these black and white photos. We have the historic and then a more current day, but really kind of shows you the changes over time. So I do love looking at this photo of the Santa Cruz River in 1904. This is looking from a mountain. So I'm forgetting what the other name of that mountain is, but this is a location that many people in Tucson are familiar with in kind of the downtown area. So when you look at this photo, what you can see here is a flowing river. You can see floodplain. So you can see that there's quite a bit of land around the river that has trees. So this is a riparian forest, a forest along the river supported by that groundwater. A lot of these would be cottonwoods, willows, mesquite trees. And it looks like this photo is perhaps from the winter where some of these trees have lost their leaves, but you can see just the beautiful Santa Cruz River running through this area and the nice extended floodplain and riparian forest. Sentinel Peak, thank you. All right, next photo. And now we have that same vantage point in 2000. So the river is still there. And if you can see my pointer here, it's still in here, maybe a little bit harder to pick out. But the river is still there, and a lot of the big differences that we see is we don't have that extensive floodplain and forest that we do. There is a little bit of vegetation, but the river has been channelized, cement lined banks, and then we have a lot of development surrounding that. All right, let's go on to the next. This is a photo also of the Santa Cruz River, and mostly what you're seeing is forest, but looking south from Martinez Hill. So this is looking on what would currently be San Xavier District lands. And we are looking really here at what is known as the Great Mesquite Forest. So there was a very extensive, one of the largest mesquite forests in the world that used to be right in this area. And you can see, as far as the eye can see here, that mesquite forest. You can see a little bit here in the middle. That is some water, but a lot of the river is not visible because of the density of that great mesquite forest. Let's go on to the next slide. And this is the same location in 2002. And you can see quite a difference here. That mesquite forest is gone. We have a much potentially broader channel here, but it's really hard to say because it was mostly covered with forest, but a lot drier. You can see the vegetation just looks a lot drier overall. So very different landscape here without that riparian mesquite bosque there anymore. Next. So this is a record describing what this area looked like back from 1917. I'm just going to read this to help paint the picture. You can close your eyes if you want to visualize this. Fed by secret springs of the Santa Cruz River, which had been alternatively flowing and trickling underground ever since it left the Mexican border, some 60 miles southward, the humble mesquite rises here to a dignity of a real tree. And this forest, once matchless for size and extent, contained trees 60 and 70 feet in height and up to 3 feet in diameter. So you can see just from this description from 1917 that at that point we had lost a lot of this forest already. So they were describing a forest that wasn't still there anymore. And this area was known by ornithologists to be a very rich area, but we were already losing that rich mesquite bosque and all its wildlife by that time. Next. Here's the Santa Cruz River near a mountain, looking at a mountain there in the background, 1958. So this is a little bit later, but I do like to show this photo because here you can see that we still have some natural banks. There is some riparian vegetation along the banks. And then if you go to the next photo, 2001, you can see the same vantage point has changed quite a bit because we have now channelized the river and added the soil cement. You can see we have some less vegetation. So we've essentially disconnected the floodplain from the river at this point. And next slide. And then I just like to throw this in. This is a photo from last year, more or less same vantage point. And we're seeing some changes in a positive way as thanks to the Santa Cruz Heritage Project, a project that Tucson Water manages, bringing recycled water to this part of the river. And there's been a huge vegetative response to water in at this location. So seeing more life thanks to that project. Next slide. So how did our rivers go from wet to dry? That's the next slide. How did our rivers dry up? Next slide, please. So this might be a little bit hard, might be a little bit small on your screen, but the bottom line that I want to communicate is that ultimately we pumped too much groundwater. And this graphic is showing that as you pump groundwater, how that draws down the water levels in your creeks and rivers. And so the water that we find in our creeks and rivers is supported by groundwater. The flow has to be supported by groundwater if it's going to be year-round, because we have rain, in 2 main rainy seasons, and that certainly can contribute to some flows in our creeks and rivers, but that would not sustain the flow year-round. So you can see from this diagram that it's groundwater levels that allow water to express itself in the channel. But as we draw down groundwater over time, then that level drops, and ultimately then it disconnects from the channel. So you don't see water anymore in the channel. And then as it continues to drop, then you actually disconnect from the roots of all that riparian forest. And that's where you'll lose the mesquites, the cottonwoods, the willows, that really wonderful, lush riparian forest that was along our Santa Cruz River and also the Tancardi and Rito rivers historically. That level does vary in terms of at what point does how deep those tree roots go. And for cottonwoods, it's about 20 feet. For mesquite trees, it can be up to 50 feet. All right, next slide. So hopefully your eyes don't cross looking at this, but the main things I wanted to communicate here is kind of the difference in groundwater levels from the early 1900s through the late 1900s. And you can see on the left, we've got the map here. And can you see you can't see my cursor. So Lauren's gonna have to do some pointing for me. But if you can see, kind of navigate to the Tucson mountain area and the Santa Cruz River, you can see the label for the Santa Cruz River. And right along there, you can see I've circled the 5 foot. So it's showing that right in that area, we have a 5 foot depth to groundwater in 1908. So the water is right there at the surface. If you move over to the Rito River, so kind of up from there, you can see that we have a 10 to 15 foot depth to groundwater, which is also very close to the surface. And then as you move upstream to the confluence, it's on the very edge of the screen there is the Rito, and that's the confluence with the Pantano there. It's 5 foot depth to groundwater. So at the beginning of the 1900s, we had groundwater levels that were supporting those year-round or seasonal flows. That changed pretty drastically over the last 100 plus years. You can see on this chart to the right, this is from Tucson Water, that the groundwater levels between 1940 and 1995 dropped quite a bit. We had up to 200 feet, over 200 feet, and Midtown Tucson, but you can see in those areas that we pointed out along the Santa Cruz River, the Rito River, the confluence area, all those have seen drops of at least 50 feet, if not 100 feet. And so that would clearly be a disconnect of water from the river, and then also a loss of the riparian forest that I talked about. All right, let's move on. This is also hard to see on your screen, but this is, we could potentially send this out as a link afterwards. So Lauren, if you can make a note for this, this was in one of our previous newsletters. We have 2 maps showing what the river extent was in Tucson at the beginning of the 1900s, and then what it is present day. And the map on the left, the dark blue, are river stretches that flowed year round, and then the lighter blue is seasonal, and then we have ephemeral. Same on the right, but you can see there's a lot less stretches that have that dark blue color and less that have the seasonal flows as well. So we'll send out that link if you want to dive in and really look closely at that, at what the change has been across the watershed. And let's go on to the next slide. So Watershed Management Group has been working to help change that trajectory. We want to see those groundwater levels rising instead of falling and supporting our rivers. And we've framed that around a 50-year vision where we would like to see our heritage of flowing creeks and rivers restored in the Tucson area. So what we'd like to see is in 2070, the Santa Cruz River, the Rito River, and their tributaries are a cooling ribbon of green that's central to our city's economy, culture, and livability. And we want to see those mesquite forests restored. So we want to see the banks of our creeks and rivers having those forests again, that we're restoring that former extent, and restoring the floodplains that supported those forests. And that is not going to look exactly how it did, of course, 100 years ago, because we have grown quite a city here. So we would be seeing green infrastructure and stormwater harvesting and other practices like that to sink water back into the ground and basically restore the watershed so it can support these healthy forests again. We would like to see stretches of Sabino Creek, Cienega Creek, Tancardi Creek, and the Rito and Santa Cruz rivers flowing year-round again that used to flow year-round, and then also the seasonal flows, but that really needs to be supported by healthy groundwater aquifer. It can't just be with recycled water. The connection of flows will also help with our populations of wildlife, native fish like the Gila top minnow, longfin dace, and all the other wildlife that depend on our riparian areas. Let's move on to the next slide. We have illustrated this 50-year vision in 6 different areas across our watershed to help people get an idea of what this looks like. What does it look like to restore our creeks and rivers and the watershed that surrounds them? So this is an image from Cienega Creek, Las Cienegas National Conservation Area, where there is some work to reintroduce beavers, and we think that's a very important strategy to help restore this creek and the rest of the watershed. Beavers do the work for us. They help slow and sink the water into the ground and expand the floodplain and support a lot more riparian vegetation. Next slide. This is an image from the Tancardi Creek, a middle stretch of the Tancardi, in particular Isabella Lee, which is an area that you can visit that's county owned. But we wanted to really illustrate what it looks like to have just a small meandering flow with still kind of that, there is actually quite a bit of floodplain that's still in this area, but would really need to bring those groundwater levels back up to have these seasonal and year-round flows again. But it's not bank-to-bank flow all the time. It's mostly going to look more like this, where it's a small meandering flow in the channel. Next. This location, one of my favorite locations to visit, this is the confluence of the Pantano River, Tancardi Creek, which forms the Rito River. So the one on the left is the Tancardi. The bridge we're seeing here is the Craycraft Road Bridge. You can go to this site anytime and check it out, and the loop does go along here, so it's really accessible and fun to go out, either walking, running, biking, and then you can actually get down into the creek here. So what we'd like to see is more seasonal flows that feed into Rito to have more flows year-round. We will see more flows in the Tancardi system that's fed by a very wet Sabino Creek in the Catalina Mountains, as well as some of the Rincon Mountains. And then on the right, Pantano definitely does still have flows contributing, not quite as much, but definitely more summertime flows, which we have seen this summer, which is coming out of the Cienega Creek watershed area. Next slide. This is looking at the Rito River. This is from the pedestrian bridge at Mountain. So again, wanting to show what this looks like in an urban setting, looking at having this connected floodplain whenever possible. We've got still the urban use there at the Rito Park, so looking at having more green infrastructure. Right now, unfortunately, if you go there, you see the parking lot is basically paved almost right up to the river. So that is not what we're looking for. We want the opposite of that. We want to have a buffer between the river and these developed areas. We want to see green infrastructure in those parking lots, lots of trees, lots of stormwater infiltration there. And then again, the flow that we're going to see in these areas as these come back is more of a meandering, shallow flow. It's not often taking up the whole channel. So the flood flows that you might picture in your head are just more specific events in response to rainfall, but the seasonal flows would be much shallower, calm flows. And next, please. This is looking at the Santa Cruz River, looking towards downtown Tucson, north of the San Xavier District. So we can see here in the future that we would have some seasonal flows, potentially perennial flows, depending on a number of projects that might come online, including some recycled water projects. But really what we're looking at here is preserving, protecting, enhancing the floodplain in this area and bringing back some of that mesquite forest to reconnect with these shallow meandering flows. This is also going to take a restoration of groundwater levels to support this, along with the recycled water projects. And next slide. And then one final illustration here of the Santa Cruz River at this iconic location, looking at a mountain, and then in the background should be like where Mission Gardens is, and seeing again all the cultural uses of the river and how important it is to our community and how accessible it can be. We really want to see these places as places again that people are connecting with. They're not paved over or developed over, or where you have such deep channels that you can't get any access to. We want to help restore these in a way that, again, people can have access and connect with these spaces again. All right, I think those are all the artist slides, and we have those on our website too. We can share that too. It's something that we like to share with folks to help inspire and see what this all could look like as we're moving forward on this 50-year vision. So I always love to share some points of progress. Lauren, you can move on to this, because it's not just all about the future. We are now experiencing some hope for our rivers, and we are seeing some really amazing return of seasonal and perennial flows in our watershed. We've helped document this through our Flow 365 community science program. And here's one of the locations I'd love to talk about, Lower Sabino Creek. Not many people get to visit this site because it is pretty much all privately owned downstream from Sabino Canyon National Recreation Area. But there is a stretch here about a half mile of this creek that has been flowing year-round, perennial, since 2016. And it historically flowed perennial, but it did dry up for a long period because of the reason I gave earlier, too much groundwater pumping. So we have seen a reduction in groundwater pumping in this area for various reasons, and that has resulted pretty quickly in seeing these flows return. Next slide. The Middle Tankardi Creek. This is another spot I love to frequent. This is near Wentworth Road, and we've, since 2019, discovered that there's a stretch here that has started to have seasonal flows return. So this would have been an area with year-round flows and maybe in drier year seasonal flows, but that dried up again due primarily to groundwater pumping. But due to a change in groundwater use, the 49ers development is near there. They started using reclaimed water for the golf course there. And slowly that has had an impact, and there's probably a number of other factors going on here. But essentially what we're seeing is that there are river creek flows here, even when it's not after rainfall. So through our flow monitoring, we saw that there were seasonal flows in the winter, starting in the winter through June in 2019. March through July 9th in 2020. And then this summer, it didn't flow in the spring because it had been so dry, but it's been flowing with all these rains and extended flow into August. And I know Sarah's here, so maybe Sarah can put in the chat if it's still flowing right now or not. But this has been an incredible area to see some of these seasonal flows returning. Next slide. This is the confluence area that I was describing earlier. It's cool to see some of the extended flows in this area, which we've also been recording to the flow monitoring. We saw 50 days of consecutive flow in the winter and spring of 2019, 21 days of consecutive flow in 2020. There were a lot of other flow days in there, but just the consecutive flow is pretty telling in terms of it being extended and connected to more than just stormwater runoff. And then this summer, we have seen 46 days of flow in July and August. So most of July, or good portion of July and most of August, it's been flowing at this location. This area historically was a big cienega. It was a big marsh. It had flow year round. And so it is known as a shallow groundwater area, and we could see those flows return as groundwater levels are restored. Next slide. And then the Santa Cruz Heritage Project, of course, is a great success story, and seeing all that the river has responded and all the wildlife and the plants to water at this location. That is all recycled water, it's not groundwater supported. Next slide. Okay, so how can you get involved? Many of you have already been involved in our River Run network. If this is new to you, you can go on to the next slide. This is a community of folks that you can join. All you have to do is join our email list, and we'll be sharing activities with you every 2 weeks, ways you can get involved. Activities like this, learning about our creeks and rivers, getting out on creek walks, which is always a ton of fun. I've been doing a couple pop-up creek walks this summer because I couldn't resist with all the flow. So we go all places all over Tucson. Our community science monitoring program, where we're actually, community members are out recording flow across our watershed. And next slide. We get out and do restoration workshops. We'll be getting out to Cienega Creek watershed a bunch this fall. Catlo, who's here today, will be leading all those restoration workshops. So come out and help us if you're feeling energetic and want to get out and see a really beautiful part of our watershed. And next, and then we do a bunch of cleanups too. So, and starting to work with our River Run Network members to organize these in their own part of the watershed, and that we provide support for that. All right, happy to take any questions that came in, and or Lauren, if you think we should move to David, we can also do that.
I think we can certainly take some questions. David did let me know that he did jump back on. Let's see where we are with that. But we did have one question that I believe you answered very thoroughly, but I will ask it just in case. So Iris wanted to know if the mesquite bosque that you talked about way in the beginning disappeared due to harvesting or lack of water. So I assume that means like rainwater harvesting or pumping is the reason that you gave most of it. So my assumption is that's the answer for that. But if you want to dive into that a little bit, you're welcome to do so.
Yeah, so definitely there was a disconnect to the groundwater. So that was a big reason why we lost a lot of our riparian forest. I know that also there was extensive cutting down of some of these areas as development happened. I'm not an expert in that history, but I know there's some great books that talk about that. So Catlo, I see you're here. If you want to put any of those book names in for folks who want to dive into the history, there are some great resources to look into. And also it looks like Sarah put in the chat that that spot is still flowing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool to see that section of the tankardi is still flowing, and we haven't gotten rain there in over a week. So there's definitely a connection to some groundwater based flows there. Yes, and thank you, Martha, for acknowledging the artist, Dennis Caldwell, a local Tucsonan who did all the artwork for those river restoration vision illustrations.
And Catlo's put in the chat some of those books. I've only sifted through them for some photos that you all have seen today, but from what I did read a little bit of them, they are really interesting. So. I'm just going to stop sharing here for just a second to prep for David's presentation if he's ready. But you're still welcome to put any questions for Lisa or any of our speakers, Josefina and David, in the chat. And Paula would like to know, Catlo, who is the author of The Little River? All right. And David, if you are ready, you are welcome to unmute.
Sure.
Awesome.
Great. Yeah, I do apologize. I was experiencing some technical difficulties. This is our first day teleworking, so please forgive me. But I'd like to give thanks for being invited to speak this evening. And thank you for being here this evening as well for our presentation. Tonight, I'd just like to share a little bit about our community, the village of Wak, or Wak Chekshon, or commonly known as San Xavier or San Xavier District. I just wanted to start by sharing my own experiences with the Santa Cruz River. When I was younger, the '83 flood happened. My family and I were on our way to pick up a cake for my brother's birthday on the east side of the river. So we get to the riverbank and the police have the road blocked off. So my parents get down out of the car and go over to where everyone's standing. A few minutes had passed and my parents came running back, and I remember my mom all excited and just telling me, oh my God, the bridge collapsed. So yeah, so that connection there. So a few years after, I went to school at Barrio Elementary School, and we couldn't cross that bridge, because it had washed away. So we had to take the long way around to school. So that's just one connection I had to the river, my experience there. And I'll share another one later in my presentation. Next slide, Lauren, please. Tonight, I'll be providing a brief history and background of our community. I'll touch on the Arizona Water Protection Fund, as well as our district vision document. Share some of the community members' memories and connections to the river. Also talk about some of the benefits of having riparian restoration sites. I'll also go over a brief O'odham language lesson. And then, I'll present, some of our current activities that are taking place in the community. And then finally end with collaboration. Next slide, please. The Wak O'odham. Our ancestors, the Tohono O'odham, have been living in this area for thousands of years. They were masters of their craft. They were skillful, industrious. I think that's a trait that carried on to future generations. I've seen some of the artifacts, and it just amazes me of the precision and the quality of work that they made. I don't think I can produce anything near what they made. They were year-round farmers. I had the opportunity of seeing a cross-section of a Tohono O'odham Canal in one of our project areas south of the community. And yeah, it was just amazing that they were getting water thousands of years ago, years and years ago, from the Santa Cruz. Another fact that people may not be aware of the Santa Cruz River is it didn't always flow where most people see it flowing today. In the past, it flowed more towards the west. I've been told this by our tribal historic preservation officer. So I've seen evidence of this. And then just over time, it just shifted back to the east. Our ancestors lived in year-round settlements, and they made their homes out of branches and brush and mud, in which the river provided. And this mud, it kind of served as an insulator. It warmed the house during the winter, and it kept it cool during the winter. They also had these extensive canal systems. I know that many community members that were my dad's age, they remember kind of playing around in the the system, and getting yelled at to, get out. So, there's some memories there. Let's see. Another fact that people may not be aware of is that according to historical records, the village of Wak was actually a mile to the north. And what had happened between maybe 1772 through 1780, they asked the O'odham that lived at that time to move south. And it was actually the Franciscans that asked them. Basically, they told them that it was too wet in that area. So, it just kind of made me, wonder what was going on. Next slide, please. This is a map of the Tohono O'odham Nation. As I stated earlier, our people were year-round farmers. So when the harvest time would come around, other O'odham from communities out west or the main reservation, or even as far as Gila River, they would come to help, or they were sometimes hired by families. So when, many of these people, would come, and then, when the harvesting was done, most went home, but, I think a few had stayed. So you get these different influences of other O'odham that, come to Wak, even, some Vibrary influences. So, over time, our communities formed and, we moved forward and, we become who we are today, the Wak O'odham, or the San Xavier District of the Tohono O'odham Nation. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk about our two riparian sites at Wak. We have two riparian sites along the Santa Cruz River. One is the Wak Hiktan, and the other is Site 2. And we feel that both projects have been successful. We receive a lot of good comments from visitors. And this wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't from a grant that the district received back in 1996 from the Arizona Water Protection Fund. So with this funding, it brought in, the infrastructure, the fencing, the various trees and vegetation. It made our streamways and ponds possible. But before that, the district council, had developed a vision document in May of 1990. And one of the statements from the document states, efforts to revegetate areas and restore riparian areas that have been damaged will be studied. With time, these areas can begin to heal. So it was good to hear that, our council, has that vision for our community. Next slide, please. On my last slide, I mentioned about the part in the vision document where it states restore riparian areas that have been damaged. Well, the 83 flood, I figured, played a part in that. I remember one elder, who was on the bank on a different day than I was. She remembers, all the trees just falling and washing away into the river, and just feeling, real sad. So, when she told me this, I can kind of see, why she would feel that way. Just seeing, everything that you knew, just kind of just get washed away. So when the Wak Hiktan was being developed, I know they went around and asked the elders at that time, what they remember about the river. They remembered these great cottonwood and mesquite trees, willow trees, just these trees with big trunks. They remember the shade. They remember the families going down there and having picnics. Someone even said that, there was braided streams. And the trees being so dense in one area, I guess there was this road that was going through, and the trees being so dense, the canopy being dense, it kind of made the road kind of look like it was going down a tunnel. So I thought that was kind of cool. And again, I'm just thankful that we got the grant, because it recreated the Wak Hiktan as close as how the elders remembered. Next slide, please. So it's good to see the community members use the Wak Hiktan. Many community members know about the Hiktan, but some members in our community don't. we had a youth worker work for our department one summer, and she had never been to the Hickman. So, one day, I just, took her down there just to, show her, what was down there. And, just the amazement on her face, she was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was down here. So, that's just part of our job, is to provide awareness and, outreach, to our community members, But, afterwards, after she knew about, the Wakiktan, she held her birthday party down there. But not only her, other community members as well, they reserve, the Hiktan for their parties. Other events that have taken place is staff outings. It was good to see everyone enjoy themselves, that day. Another big day that, the Hiktan gets reserved is during Easter. We have a lot of families come up for that. We've had a few trainings held out there. And then also we've had a couple of marriages, take place down there. And then as well as, visitors from the surrounding communities. And we've had even visitors from around the world, come down just to take a look, at this successful project. We do hold our staff renewal ceremony at the Wakiktan at least, every 4 years. But due to COVID this past year, we weren't able to hold it. So hopefully, next year we'll be able to hold that staff renewal ceremony. But, in the past, the ceremony, it's brought people together to this special place. And, I've overheard one community member mention, gosh, I just wish it looked like this all over, meaning our community. And, I share that feeling too. Next slide, please. Another desire, that the community wanted to see, was the wildlife. They wanted the wildlife to return. And that term, you build it, they will come. Yeah, the wildlife answered. So there have been reports of, deer being spotted down there. There's raccoon, raccoon tracks there. I've seen skunk. I've seen some turtles, various birds, cardinals, hummingbirds, and even a pair of turkeys. They're not there all the time. They come every now and then, but I haven't seen them around lately. But with the turkeys, it's just amazing just to see them walking around, at the Wakiktan. Next slide, please. Another benefit is the community wanted, as well as the elders, is education to the youth, and kind of sort of use it as a living classroom. We've had various school and college groups come out to the Hiktan to learn about the riparian sites. The summer program offered by our education center came down one summer and kind of did a scavenger hunt, locating the various trees and vegetation growing down there. And afterwards they had lunch, but it seemed like everyone had fun. Next slide, please. Another benefit, the community and elders wanted was recreation. They just wanted a place, where they can enjoy the aesthetics, just be themselves and just have a good time. And let's see, here you can see them playing volley chair. And in going back to the Easter outing, I believe this is, at one of those events. So, they, do invite their families, as well as, O'odham from other communities, and even the Pascua Yaqui tribe, will sometimes come and join them. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is just a brief O'odham lesson, just related to, riparian, areas. As I mentioned, Wak, it's the name of our village, but it, when translated into O'odham, it means like to enter or to go in. And I think, this is a river characteristic that the Wak O'odham, had observed. Our village is named after this river characteristic because, the water does go back in at one point. So which, makes sense. The Hiktan it roughly means cutting of the earth's surface, thereby, creating a channel. So that's why, Wakiktan, is named that. Shutag, it means water. Cottonwood, you would say apa. Willow Jewel, and Mesquite Hui. Okay, next slide, please. So these are the current activities that our department and our community have been involved with. Our department had organized with the nation's Wildlife and Vegetation Management Group for 3 buffalo grass pool events and 2 tamarask pool events. So these events, I think were successful. We got people, staff members and their families, and even non-community members come out and lend us a hand. So, but I think the good part was just seeing the youth get out there to learn and recognize these invasive species. And I think for me afterwards, you just get the sense of accomplishment, but still there's still plenty more to do. Next slide, please. Let's see. My other connection to the Santa Cruz River is going on about 3 years now. And, just driving over that same bridge, that had washed out years ago in my youth. I looked into the riverbed, which is normally dry. And one day, I had noticed, water flowing down there. And, at first, I thought, well, maybe there's a breach at the co-op farm. Then, a couple days passed, and I kept seeing, water down there. And so, I kind of got curious and, went to go take a look. So, I followed it and I came to this one area, where the water was coming up. So, it was kind of surprising to me. I was like, wow, am I seeing this? So, again, I never thought, in my lifetime, I see the river flow naturally. So, so there's a good feeling of seeing, the flow return, I just can't, describe it in words. And, I'm sure, the WAC community feels the same way I do in wanting to, protect and preserve it. And as I mentioned before, the council's vision of having the river riparian area heal itself, that's taking place. And on the other side, we've had reports of people, running through the river flow area, using, off-highway vehicles, just disrupting the habitat and, damaging the vegetation. So, we're looking into solutions on, how to protect this area, for the WAC O'odham and generations to come. Let's see, this photo here, we had Claire Sedmeyer assist us, with some questions we had. And she invited us, on a couple of fish surveys, that were taking place upstream and downstream. Let's see, TOCC, which stands for the Tohono O'odham Community College, and the U of A. We met with Michael Bogan from the U of A to discuss, potential programs, to link the Tohono O'odham Community College and U of A students to the San Xavier District Natural Resources Department, kind of by creating a monitoring program for the river, and collaborate in making connections with others. The Watershed Management Group is a perfect example of that. Lisa, she was able to connect me with a local artist, who would, like to meet with our culture committee sometime. So, these, connections are good. And, it helps us, grow and, build bridges, as a Santa Cruz River community. But I think overall, we would like to see, O'odham youth, take up studies in environmental sciences and, have careers in the natural resources field. Next slide, please. And that concludes my presentation. So if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, David. That was
Thank you.
lovely. I think we did have a few questions. Let me see what we're in the chat. This might be going back to a question for Lisa and her presentation, but anyone is welcome to answer. Carol wants to know, in terms of recharging the rivers via increased groundwater, how do you suggest we proceed when the Colorado River is so very low?
I can say a few words, but would love to open it up to David and Josefina as well, if they have anything they'd like to share. The Colorado River water certainly has played an important role in helping our community recover some groundwater levels. We've been recharging in various areas and in some areas that aren't helping with our riparian areas as well. So we are hoping to more strategically align those. But regardless of what's happening with the Colorado River, we have a lot that we can do with local waters. And this is something that WMG has been talking a lot about, particularly this summer, but this concept of hydro local, and that is that we have such natural local abundance that we can steward, and this summer is a great example of that, of all the plentiful rains that have been coming from the monsoon. And if we have landscaped in a way that helps welcome that water into the soil and lets it infiltrate, then we can do a lot of recharge instead of letting it all run off or evaporate. So if you're looking at some of those practices, that's the type of thing that our organization offers through various classes and workshops, but often referred to as rainwater harvesting or green infrastructure. Those are a lot of the solutions we can put in place locally to help recharge more aquifer. And at the same time, when we can use rainwater, gray water, stormwater for, let's say, irrigating our plants, then we don't have to use municipal water for that purpose. So that helps us reduce the amount of water we have to use, which could also reduce pumping in areas where they are pumping groundwater for irrigation. David or Josefina, would you want to add to that?
Well, you answered well, Miss Lisa. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I don't have anything to add at this time.
Great. Thank you, Lisa, for that answer. And I've got a few other questions. I think you did answer one, David. Thank you so much for that language lesson. I've really enjoyed learning a little bit about the language that you speak, as well as how to pronounce and say them correctly. So thank you so much for that. And we also wanted to know, or Iris, excuse me, wanted to know what a little bit more about this photo that we've got here. So what are the structures in this last photo?
Actually, that's photos of the community. Those are, homes of past community members. So I don't have a year on this, but this was taken from the San Xavier Mission looking southwest towards the Black Mountain. So that clearing in the center, I don't know if many people are familiar with our dance ramada. So that's where that would be. So, but yeah, that's, homes of the O'odham that lived back at that time.
Awesome, thank you. What other questions did we have? And we also had a question. Josefina wants to know if non-O'odham are permitted to visit the walk restored area that you have been talking so much about with all these beautiful photos.
Oh, yes, yes. We do, offer visits, and just get in contact with me. We do have a form that, we need to get approved by our administration. So, that's the only thing. And once that's approved, we can definitely set up, visits.
Awesome. And Paula wanted to know what was the name of the second riparian restored area in the district?
We never got around to, formalizing a name for it. So it's just, generally just called Site 2.
That's a good name. I think that works.
And I think it's just one of the lesser known sites. But Waukegan's a lot closer. Site 2 is about a mile to the south, so it's a little further more for people.
David, I'm wondering, well, one, I really appreciated hearing your story about your own observations of the river flow returning at that location. I can only imagine how amazing it felt to see that and discover that. I'm wondering if you've made any observations from the summer. What's the response of that area with all these monsoon rains that we've been having?
I haven't been out there lately. The last time I was out there, a lot of the areas had kind of turned to marsh, and there was some areas, where it flowed. But from what I'm seeing, from the bridge, the cottonwoods and the willows have really taken off. They're growing so high now. So yeah, but I definitely need to get back out there and see what's going on.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much water has gone through there. And I know there was cottonwoods before all of this, so it sounds like they've got a jump start with all the extra water.
Yes, yes.
I have a question. In fact, I'm going to jump in unless, Lauren, you have other questions lined up. For both David and Josefina, just hearing the stories is so moving for me and powerful, and wondering about, and just also, David, the vision of the elders that they set for restoring that riparian area. I'm wondering if you can share any more on your community's vision for the river moving forward. David, for the San Xavier District, and then Josefina, for your community. What would be some aspects of the vision and hopes for the river, for the Santa Cruz River moving forward?
I think for us is just, again, protecting and preserving it, for future generations. And, getting, people out there, especially youth, to get into backgrounds, the natural environment, and, possibly, working with others and setting up a monitoring program, and maybe even providing mentorship.
In our side, in Barrio Kroeger Lane and along the rivers, the different neighborhoods of barrios, I think it's endless, with the communication and unification of how do we come together and learn together and build that vision as community. I think that's very significant. And of course, with the pandemic, it's been hard for us to come together, but hopefully we can do that soon. And that way, with the Santa Cruz Heritage County City, I like to see unity of all of us coming together. I think it'll be more taken care of, because I know of individuals within our neighborhood that go to the river and clean. I think the maintaining of the river and everyone learning that we need to keep it well will happen if we're all working together. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I think the youth connection is a theme that I'm seeing here, and really appreciate the efforts from each of your communities for connecting youth and watershed management groups. Hoping to do more of that as well with our family programming. So that's such an important piece of this long-term work.
Wonderful. Yes, thank all of you. Again, I just really enjoyed hearing your stories, and thank you all, our audience, for all of the questions. So I really appreciate all of you engaging with our speakers today. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So if you have a last minute question, definitely put that in the chat and we can definitely ask our speakers. But I think we may be able to have some closing remarks from our speakers, and thank you all for attending today.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, wanted to thank David and Josefina for joining us today and sharing your perspective with our River Run Network members. It was really beautiful to hear your stories, and we would love to find more opportunities to collaborate with you all.
Thank you, likewise.
Thank you.